Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Part 2. Stories from the 1001 Tales of Scheherazade or the Arabian Nights. The desperate entertainments of a wife delaying execution by her husband. This translation of 42 stories from a much larger collection has become the most well-known of folk tales for younger readers. Aladdin and his Wonderful Lamp, The Voyages of Sinbad, and Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves. Part 2. The captain, having lost 2 brave fellows of his troop, was afraid of diminishing it too much by pursuing this plan to get information of the residence of their plunderer, and therefore resolved to take upon himself the important commission. Accordingly, he addressed himself to Baba Mustapha, who did him the same service he had done to the other robbers. He had not set any particular mark on the house, but examined and observed it so carefully by passing often by it that it was impossible for him to mistake it. Well satisfied with his attempt and informed of what he wanted to know, he returned to the forest, and when he came into the cave where the troop waited for him, said, "Now, comrades, nothing can prevent our full revenge, as I am certain of the house. And in my way hither I have thought how to put it into execution. But if anyone can form a better expedient, let him communicate it." He then told him his contrivance, and as they approved of it, ordered them to go into the villages about and buy 19 mules with 38 large leather jars, one full of oil and the others empty. In 2 or 3 days' time, the robbers had purchased the mules and jars, and as the mouths of the jars were rather too narrow for this purpose, the captain caused them to be widened, and after having put one of his men into each with the weapons with which he thought fit, leaving open the seam which had been undone to leave them room to breathe, he rubbed the jars on the outside with oil from the full vessel. When the 19 mules were loaded with 37 robbers in jars and the jar of oil, the captain set out with them, and reached the town by the dusk of the evening. He led them through the streets till he came to Ali Baba's door, where he was sitting after supper to take the air. He stopped his mules, addressed himself to him, and said, "I have brought some oil a great way to sell at tomorrow's market, and it is now so late that I do not know where to lodge. If I should not be troublesome to you, do me the favor to let me pass the night with you." Though Ali Baba had seen the captain of the robbers in the forest, and had heard him speak, it was impossible to know him in the disguise of an oil merchant. He told him he should be welcome, and immediately opened his gates for the mules to go into the yard. At the same time he called to a slave, and ordered him, when the mules were unloaded, to put them into the stable and to feed them, and then went to Marjana to bid her make a good supper for his guest. After they had finished supper, Ali Baba, charging Marjana afresh to take care of his guests, said to her, "Tomorrow morning I am going to the bath before day breaks. Take care my bathing linen can be ready. Give them to Abda Allah, and make me some good broth against I return." After this he went to bed. In the meantime the captain of the robbers went into the yard, and took off the lid of each jar, and gave his people orders what to do. Beginning at the first jar, and so on to the last, he said to each man, "As soon as I throw some stones out of the chamber window where I sleep, do not fail to come out, and I will immediately join you." After this he returned into the house, when Marjana, taking up a light, conducted him to his chamber. Marjana, remembering Ali Baba's orders, got his bathing linen ready, and ordered Abda Allah to set on the pot for the broth. But while it was preparing, the lamp went out, and there was no more oil in the house. So she took the oil pot and went into the yard. When she came nigh to the first jar, the robber within said softly, "Is it time?" Without showing her amazement, she answered, "Not yet, but presently." She went quietly in this manner to all the jars, giving the same answer till she came to the jar of oil. By this means Marjana found that her master Ali Baba had admitted 38 robbers into his house, and that this pretended oil merchant was their captain. She made what haste she could to fill her oil pot, and returned into her kitchen, where, as soon as she had lighted her lamp, she took a great kettle, went again to the oil jar, filled the kettle, set it on a large wood fire, and as soon as it boiled, went and poured enough into every jar to stifle and destroy the robber within. When she had done this, she returned into the kitchen, and having put out the great fire she had made to boil the oil, and leaving just enough to make the broth, put out the lamp also, and remained silent, resolving not to go to rest till she had observed what might follow through a window of the kitchen, which opened into the yard. She had not waited long before the captain of the robbers got up, opened the window, and finding no light and hearing no noise or anyone stirring in the house, gave the appointed signal by throwing little stones at the jars. He then listened, but not hearing or perceiving anything, he began to grow uneasy, threw stones again a second time, and also a third time, and could not comprehend the reason that none of them should answer his signal. Much alarmed, he went softly down into the yard, and going to the first jar, whilst asking the robber, whom he thought was alive, if he was in readiness, smelt the boiled oil, which sent forth a steam out of the jar. Hence he suspected that his plot to murder Ali Baba and plunder his house was discovered. Examining all the jars, one after another, he found that all his gang were dead, and enraged to despair at having failed in his design, he forced the lock of a door that led from the yard to the garden, and climbing over the walls, made his escape. When Marjana saw him depart, she went to bed, satisfied and pleased to have succeeded so well in saving her master and family. Ali Baba rose before day, and, followed by his slave, went to the bath, entirely ignorant of the important event which had happened at home. When he returned, he was much surprised to see the oil jars, and that the merchant was not gone with the mules, and asked Marjana the reason of it. "Oh, my master," she answered, "God preserve you and your family. You will be better informed of what you wish to know when you have seen what I have showed you, if you will follow me." Then she bade him look into the first jar. Ali Baba did so, and seeing a man, started back in alarm, and cried out. "Be not afraid," said Marjana. "The man you see there can neither do you or anyone else any harm. He is dead." "Oh, Marjana," said Ali Baba, "what is it that you show me?" "Moderate your astonishment," replied Marjana, "and do not excite the curiosity of the neighbors, for it is of great importance to keep this affair secret. Look into all the other jars." Ali Baba examined all the other jars, one after another, and when he came to that which had the oil in it, found it prodigiously sunk, and stood for some time motionless, sometimes looking at the jars, and sometimes at Marjana, without saying a word, so great was his surprise. Marjana then told him all she had done, from the first observing the mark upon the house, to the destruction of the robbers, and the flight of their captain. On hearing of these brave deeds from the lips of Marjana, Ali Baba said to her, "God, by your means, has delivered me from the snares these robbers laid for my destruction. I owe my life to you, and for the first token of my acknowledgment, give you your liberty from this moment, till I can complete your recompense as I intend." Ali Baba's garden was very long, and shaded at the further end by a great number of large trees. Near these, he and the slave Abda Allah dug a trench, long and wide enough to hold the bodies of the robbers, and as the earth was light, they were not long in doing it. When this was done, Ali Baba hid the jars and weapons, and as he had no occasion for the mules, he sent them at different times to be sold in the market by his slave. Meanwhile, the captain returned to the forest with inconceivable mortification. He did not stay long. The loneliness of the gloomy cavern became frightful to him. He determined, however, to avenge the fate of his companions and to accomplish the death of Ali Baba. For this purpose he returned to the town, and took lodging in a khan, and disguised himself as a merchant in silks. Under his assumed character he gradually conveyed a great many sorts of rich stuffs and fine linen to his lodging from the cavern, with all necessary precaution to conceal the place where he brought them. In order to dispose of the merchandise, when he had thus amassed them together, he took a warehouse, which happened to be opposite to Qasim's, which Ali Baba's son had occupied since the death of his uncle. He took the name of Khoja Hussain, and, as a newcomer, was, according to custom, extremely civil and complaisant to all the merchants his neighbors. Ali Baba's son was, from his vicinity, one of the first to converse with Khoja Hussain, who strove to cultivate his friendship more particularly. 2 or 3 days after he was settled, Ali Baba came to see his son, and the captain of the robbers recognized him at once, and soon learned from his son who he was. After this, he increased his assiduities, caressed him in the most engaging manner, made him some small presents, and often asked him to dine and sup with him. One day Ali Baba's son and Khoja Hussain met by appointment, took their walk, and as they returned, Ali Baba's son led Khoja Hussain through the street where his father lived, and when they came to the house, stopped and knocked at the door. "This," said he, "is my father's house, who, from the account I have given him of your friendship, charged me to procure him the honor of your acquaintance, and I desire you to add this pleasure to those for which I have already indebted to you." Though it was the sole aim of Khoja Hussain to introduce himself into Ali Baba's house, that he might kill him, yet he excused himself, and offered to take his leave. But a slave having opened the door, Ali Baba's son took him by the hand and led him in. Ali Baba received Khoja Hussain with a smiling countenance, and in the most obliging manner he could wish. He thanked him for all the favors he had done his son, adding withal, the obligation was the greater as he was a young man, not much acquainted with the world, and that he might contribute to his information. After a little more conversation, he offered again to take his leave, when Ali Baba, stopping him, said, "Where are you going in so much haste? I beg you would do me the honor to sup with me. Though my entertainment may not be worthy of your acceptance, such as it is, I heartily offer it." "Oh, my master," replied Khoja Hussain, "I am thoroughly persuaded by your goodwill, but the truth is, I can eat no victuals that have any salt in them. Therefore, judge how I should feel at your table."
"If that is the only reason,"
said Ali Baba,
"it ought not deprive me from the honor of your company. For there is no salt ever put into my bread, and as to the meat we shall have tonight, I promise you there shall be none in that. Therefore, do me the favor to stay."
Then Ali Baba went into the kitchen and ordered Marjana to put no salt to the meat that was to be dressed that night, and to make quickly 2 or 3 dishes besides what he had ordered, but to be sure to put no salt in them. Now Marjana, who was always ready to obey her master, could not help being surprised at this order.
"Who is this strange man," said she, "who eats no salt with his meat? Your supper will be spoiled if I keep it back so long." "Do not be angry, Marjana," replied Ali Baba. "He is an honest man, therefore do as I bid you." Marjana obeyed, though with no little reluctance, and had a curiosity to see this man who ate no salt. To this end, when she had finished with what she had to do in the kitchen, she helped Abda Allah carry up the dishes, and looking to Khoja Hussain, knew him at first sight, notwithstanding his disguise, to be the captain of the robbers, and examining him very carefully, perceived that he had a dagger under his garment. "I am not in the least amazed,"
she said to herself,
"that this wicked man, who is my master's greatest enemy, would eat no salt with him, since he intends to assassinate him. But I will prevent him." When Abda Allah had put the service of fruit with the wine before Ali Baba, Marjana retired, dressed herself neatly with a suitable headdress like a dancer, girded her waist with a silver-gilt girdle to which were hung a poignard with a hilt and guard of the same metal, and put a handsome veil on her face. When she had thus attired herself, she said to Abda Allah, "Take your tabor, and let us go and divert our master and his son's friend, as we do sometimes when he is alone." Abda Allah took his tabor and played all the way into the hall before Marjana, who, when she came to the door, made a low obeisance by way of asking leave to exhibit her skill. "Come in, Marjana," said Ali Baba, "and let Khoja Hussain see what you can do, that he may tell us what he thinks of your performance." After she had danced several dances with much grace, she drew the poignard, and holding it in her hand began a dance, in which she outdid herself by the many different figures, light movements, and the surprising leaps and wonderful exertions with which she accompanied it. Sometimes she presented the poignard to one breast, sometimes to another, and oftentimes seemed to strike her own. At last she snatched the tabor from Abda Allah with her left hand, and holding the dagger in her right, presented the other side of the tabor, after the manner of those who get a livelihood by dancing, and solicit the liberality of the spectators.
Ali Baba put a piece of gold into the tabor, as also did his son, and Khoja Hussain, seeing that she was coming to him, had pulled his purse out of his bosom to make her a present. But while he was putting his hands into it, Marjana plunged the poignard into his heart. Ali Baba and his son, shocked at this action, cried out aloud. "Ill-omened woman!" exclaimed Ali Baba. "What have you done to ruin me and my family?"
"It was to preserve, not to ruin you," answered Marjana. "For see here," continued she, opening the pretended Khoja Hussein's garment and showing the dagger, "what an enemy you had entertained. Look well at him, and you will find him to be both the pretended oil merchant and the captain of the gang of 40 robbers. Remember, too, that he would not eat salt with you, and what would you have more to persuade you of his wicked design? Before I saw him, I suspected him as soon as you told me you had such a guest. I knew him, and you now find that my suspicion was not groundless." Then Ali Baba, seeing that Marjana had saved his life a second time, embraced her. "O Marjana," said he, "I gave you your liberty, and then promised you that my gratitude should not stop there, but that I would soon give you higher proofs of its sincerity, which I now do by making you my daughter-in-law." Then addressing himself to his son, he said, "I believe you, son, to be so dutiful a child that you will not refuse Marjana for your wife. You see that Khoja Hussain sought your friendship with a treacherous design to take away my life, and if he had succeeded, there is no doubt that he would have sacrificed you also to his revenge. Consider that by marrying Marjana, you marry the preserver of our family." A few days afterwards, Ali Baba celebrated the nuptials of his son and Marjana with great solemnity, a sumptuous feast, and the usual dancing and spectacles, and had the satisfaction to see that his friends and neighbors whom he invited had no knowledge of the true motives of the marriage, but that those who were not unacquainted with Marjana's good qualities commended his generosity and goodness of heart. Ali Baba did not visit the robber's cave for a whole year, as he supposed the other two, whom he could get no account of, might be alive. At the year's end, when he found that they had not made any attempt to disturb him, he resolved to make another journey. He mounted his horse, and when he came to the cave he alighted, tied his horse to a tree, then approaching the entrance, pronounced the words, "Open, Sim Sim," whereupon the door opened. He entered the cavern, and by the condition he found things in, judged that nobody had been there since the captain had fetched the goods for his shop. From this time he believed he was the only person in the world who had the secret of opening the cave, and that all the treasure was at his sole disposal. He put as much gold into his saddlebags as his horses would carry, and returned to the town. Some years later he carried his son to the cave, and taught him the secret, which he handed down to his posterity, who, using their good fortune with moderation, lived in great honor and splendor, till they were visited by the Terminator of delights and the Separator of companions. Good night, Nora.